The morning sun barely touched the streets of downtown Albany when Marcus Thompson woke up in his cozy bedroom. The walls were covered with science fair medals and math competition certificates, telling the story of a 12-year-old boy who loved learning more than video games. Unlike other kids his age, Marcus didn't mind waking up early. Today was Thursday, and Thursday meant advanced math class at the city's special program for gifted students. His mother, Diana Thompson, was already in the kitchen making breakfast. She worked as a civil rights lawyer before becoming the First Lady of New York, but she never let her new position change their family's normal routines. She believed in raising Marcus like any other child, despite his father being the state's governor. "Do you want a ride to the station today?" Diana asked, placing a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Marcus. She always offered, even though she knew what his answer would be. "No, thanks, Mom," Marcus replied, adjusting his favorite blue backpack on his shoulder. "I like taking the subway. It makes me feel normal." He smiled, showing the small gap between his front teeth that made him look younger than 12. The morning was crisp, and Marcus walked the 5 blocks to the subway station with confidence in his steps. People passed by without recognizing him. That's exactly how he and his parents wanted it. At school and in public, he was just Marcus, not the governor's son. He wore regular clothes, jeans, a plain red t-shirt, and his well-worn sneakers. The only special thing about him was his backpack, a gift from his father, with a small American flag pin on the strap. At the station, the morning rush hour was in full swing. Business people in suits rushed past, students with heavy bags shuffled along, and tired workers headed home from night shifts. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the familiar smell of the subway, a mix of cleaning products and stale air, filled his nostrils. James Wheeler had been working at this station for 15 years, and this Thursday was already testing his patience. His alarm hadn't gone off, his coffee maker broke, and his supervisor had just yelled at him about the cleanliness of the station. At 52, Wheeler felt stuck in a job that gave him nothing but headaches. He had just spent an hour cleaning the glass partitions, and he wasn't about to let anyone mess them up. Marcus stood in line to buy his ticket, even though he had a monthly pass in his pocket. He liked watching people, understanding how the subway system worked, and feeling part of the city's daily life. While waiting, he leaned slightly against one of the freshly cleaned glass partitions, his backpack creating a small squeak against the surface. Wheeler noticed the sound immediately. His eyes landed on Marcus, seeing only what he wanted to see, another kid who didn't respect public property. The morning's frustrations bubbled up inside him, mixed with prejudices he'd never confronted in himself. He didn't see a well-behaved honor student. He saw a target for his built-up anger. Marcus felt the presence before he saw it. Wheeler's heavy footsteps approaching rapidly from behind. "Hey, get off that glass!" Wheeler's voice boomed through the station. Before Marcus could even turn around or step away, he felt 2 hard hands against his shoulders. The push was much harder than necessary. Marcus's feet left the ground for a moment, and time seemed to slow down. His blue backpack flew one way, his math textbook another. He hit the concrete floor with a thud that echoed through the station. The fall knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. The station went quiet. Then came the gasps, the murmurs, and the inevitable sound of phone cameras being activated. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes rushed to help Marcus up. Her hands were gentle as she helped him collect his scattered belongings. "Are you okay, young man?" she asked, concern filling her voice. Marcus nodded, trying to keep his composure despite the stinging in his palms and knees. His father had always taught him to handle difficult situations with dignity. Wheeler stood there, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face. "That'll teach you to respect public property," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. He turned away, heading back to his post, believing this was just another moment in just another day. Little did he know that this moment would change not only his life but the lives of many others. Because Marcus Thompson wasn't just any child, and this wasn't going to be just another forgettable incident in the New York subway system. The subway station's security cameras captured everything in stark detail. Within minutes of Marcus's fall, 3 different passengers had uploaded their cell phone videos to social media. People standing nearby hadn't recognized the quiet, dignified boy who was now carefully brushing dust off his jeans, but they all felt the wrongness of what they had just witnessed. Sarah Chen, a young woman in a business suit, stepped forward with her phone still recording. I got everything on video, she announced loudly, making sure Wheeler could hear her, including your employee badge number. Her hands were shaking with anger, but her voice remained steady. Wheeler's smirk began to fade. Something about the way other passengers were looking at him made him uncomfortable. The elderly woman who had helped Marcus up was now standing protectively beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Her name was Margaret Wilson, and in her 40 years of riding the subway, she had never spoken up against anyone. Today was different. "Young man," Margaret said to Marcus, deliberately raising her voice, "would you like me to help you report this incident?" Her eyes, usually soft with kindness, threw daggers at Wheeler. More passengers stopped to watch, creating a growing circle around the scene. Marcus touched his scraped elbow, feeling the sting but refusing to show pain. His father had taught him about moments like these. Moments when keeping calm was more powerful than getting angry. "Yes, please," he answered politely. "I would appreciate that." Wheeler's face turned an uncomfortable shade of red. He hadn't expected this level of response from the crowd. Usually, people just minded their own business in the subway. He stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Now, look here," he started, but a deep voice cut him off. "I suggest you don't say another word." The voice belonged to Michael Rodriguez, an off-duty police officer who had witnessed the entire incident. He hadn't been fast enough to prevent the push, but he could handle what came next. "Sir, I'm an NYPD officer, and I'd like to take statements from everyone who witnessed this assault." The word assault hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Wheeler's mouth opened and closed without making a sound. He looked around desperately for support, but found none. The morning commuters who usually rushed past without a glance were all watching now, many with phones pointed in his direction. Marcus sat down on a nearby bench, pulling out his phone. His hands were steady as he typed a message to his mother. "Mom, something happened at the station. I'm okay, but there are police here. Can you come?" He added his location and pressed send, knowing his mother would understand the importance of handling this quietly. Rodriguez was professionally collecting contact information from witnesses when the station supervisor, Mr. Peterson, came running down the stairs. Someone had called the main office, and the words "child" and "assault" had sent him rushing to the scene. His face went pale when he saw the crowd and the cameras. "Wheeler," Peterson barked, "in my office." Now, he turned to Marcus with a completely different tone. "Young man, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" Marcus shook his head. "I'm okay, sir. Just a few scrapes." He paused, then added with remarkable composure, "But I think we need to talk about why your employee thought it was okay to push a kid." The maturity in his voice made several onlookers exchange glances. Sarah Chen was still recording, capturing Marcus's dignity in the face of injustice. She had already posted the initial video, and it was gaining views by the second. Diana Thompson's reply came quickly. "On my way. Stay with Officer Rodriguez. Dad and I will handle this." Marcus read the message and took a deep breath. He knew what was coming: the media storm, the questions, the spotlight he and his parents had carefully avoided. But maybe, he thought, this could lead to something good. Wheeler, following his supervisor upstairs, felt a growing sense of dread. Something about the boy's calm demeanor, the way he handled himself, suggested this wasn't going to end with just a complaint form. As he climbed the stairs, more phones recorded his retreat, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the wail of approaching police sirens. The morning sun now streamed fully through the station's street-level windows, illuminating the scene below. In its light, a young boy's dignity had transformed a moment of cruelty into something much more significant, though none of them yet knew just how far-reaching the consequences would be. Governor James Thompson II sat in his large office on the third floor of the state capitol building. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across his desk where he was reviewing education budget proposals. His secretary, Linda Martinez, knocked on the door with her usual 3 quick taps. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his papers. Linda entered, but something in her hurried steps made him raise his head. She was holding her tablet with an unusual expression of concern. "Sir, you need to see this. It's trending on social media." Linda turned her tablet toward him. It was posted 20 minutes ago from Central Station. The governor's eyes moved to the screen, where a video was playing. His hand froze mid-signature as he recognized the blue backpack he had given Marcus for his birthday. The pen fell from his fingers as he watched his son fall to the ground. The video had already gained over 50,000 views and was spreading rapidly. "Get me Diana on the phone," he said quietly, his voice controlled but tight with emotion. "And clear my schedule for the next 2 hours." Linda nodded and rushed out, knowing that calm tone meant the governor was holding back serious anger. Meanwhile, in the subway station supervisor's office, James Wheeler sat sweating in an uncomfortable chair. His supervisor, Mr. Peterson, was pacing back and forth, occasionally glancing at his computer screen where the viral video kept playing. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Peterson asked for the third time. "Any idea at all?" He stopped pacing and leaned over his desk. "That boy you pushed? People are starting to recognize him from the governor's family photos." Wheeler's face, already pale, turned almost white. The governor's son?" His voice cracked. The reality of his actions began crashing down around him. But he was just, "I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem." Peterson exploded. "You didn't know. You didn't think. You just acted on." He stopped himself, not wanting to say the word they were both thinking. Downstairs, Diana Thompson had arrived at the station. She moved quickly through the crowd that had gathered, her security detail trying to be discreet. Marcus saw her first and stood up straighter. She wrapped him in a tight hug, then held him at arm's length to check for injuries. "I'm okay, Mom," Marcus assured her, but Diana's trained lawyer's eye caught the scrapes on his palms and the tear in his jeans. Officer Rodriguez approached them, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly, "we have 12 witnesses who've given statements, and there's clear video evidence. Would you like to press charges?" Before Diana could answer, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her husband. "I've seen the video, coming there now. Keep the press away from Marcus. This is about to explode." She was right. Local news vans were already pulling up outside the station. The video had been picked up by major news networks, and social media was buzzing with outrage. #SubwayPush and #GovernorSon were trending nationwide. Up in the supervisor's office, Wheeler's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. His daughter was calling, having recognized him in the viral video. His union representative was texting, asking if he needed legal representation. The weight of his actions was becoming unbearable. "They're calling it a hate crime on social media," Peterson said, scrolling through his phone. "The governor's office just announced he's on his way here." He looked at Wheeler with a mix of disgust and pity. "What were you thinking?" Wheeler stared at his hands, the same hands that had pushed a 12-year-old boy to the ground. I wasn't thinking," he admitted finally. "I was angry about other things, and I just saw what I wanted to see." The station's main entrance was now crowded with reporters. Diana had moved Marcus to a private security office where he sat doing his math homework as if nothing unusual had happened. But his hand shook slightly as he solved equations, the only sign that the morning's events had affected him. Suddenly, the room's TV screen lit up with breaking news. The governor's car had been spotted leaving the Capitol. Every news channel was running the video of the incident, some with headlines like "Governor's son assaulted at subway station" and "Racial incident rocks governor's family." Diana's phone buzzed again. This time it was from the governor's chief of staff. "Press conference in 1 hour. This is going to be big. How does Marcus want to handle it?" Marcus looked up from his homework, meeting his mother's eyes. They both knew that what happened next would be about more than just one morning at a subway station. It would be about all the mornings, all the incidents, all the times when cameras weren't recording and victims weren't governor's sons. Governor James Thompson Aya's black SUV pulled up to the subway station exactly 47 minutes after he had seen the video. News cameras flashed like lightning as he stepped out, his face serious but composed. He wore no tie, having left in such a hurry that his usual perfect appearance was slightly rumpled. This made him look more like Marcus's father than the state's governor. Inside the station supervisor's office, Wheeler sat watching the live news feed on Peterson's computer. His hands wouldn't stop shaking as he saw the governor exit his vehicle. The same governor whose campaign posters Wheeler had passed every day last year. The same governor who had promised to make New York a better place for everyone. "He's here," Peterson said unnecessarily, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The governor wants to see you personally." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Wheeler felt sick. On the computer screen, next to the live news feed, was Marcus's school photo from the governor's family website. The boy's bright smile and kind eyes made Wheeler's stomach turn. How had he not recognized him? But then again, why should it matter who the boy was? Downstairs, the governor first went to the security office where Marcus and Diana waited. The door closed behind him, and for 5 full minutes, no one heard anything. Inside, father and son sat across from each other while Diana stood by the window. "Are you okay, son?" the governor asked softly, his public persona completely gone. Marcus nodded, then surprised both his parents by speaking firmly. "Dad, I don't want you to fire him," Marcus said. His parents exchanged glances. "I want you to make this mean something more." The governor studied his son's face carefully. "What do you mean?" "Maybe." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully like he'd seen his father do so many times. "Maybe this happened to me because it needs to stop happening to everyone else." Diana moved from the window to stand behind her son, placing her hands on his shoulders. The governor's eyes grew wet with pride and sadness. His 12-year-old boy was thinking like a leader, even after being treated so roughly. Meanwhile, Officer Rodriguez had finished gathering all the witness statements. Sarah Chen's video had now been viewed over 1 million times, and she was giving interviews to local news stations. "I just couldn't believe what I was seeing," she told reporters. The boy was so calm and dignified, while this grown man acted like a bully. The elderly woman, Margaret Wilson, had refused to leave the station. She sat on a bench, telling anyone who would listen about Marcus's politeness and strength. "That boy has his father's backbone and his mother's grace," she said, not knowing how right she was about the parents. Upstairs, Wheeler jumped when Peterson's office door opened. 2 security guards entered, followed by the governor himself. Wheeler stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Governor Thompson was taller in person than he looked on TV. He walked slowly to Peterson's desk and picked up the frame that held Marcus's school photo. For a long moment, he just looked at it, then turned to Wheeler. "Do you know why my son takes the subway?" the governor asked quietly. Wheeler shook his head, his throat too dry to speak. "Because his mother, and I want him to grow up understanding all parts of our city. All people, not just the ones who look like him or come from privilege." Wheeler's legs felt weak. He grabbed the desk to steady himself. "Sir, I didn't know he was your son," Wheeler managed to say. The governor's face hardened. "Would it have made a difference if you had known?" The question hit Wheeler like a physical blow. Should it make a difference? Tears started rolling down Wheeler's cheeks as 15 years of built-up prejudice began to crack. The governor set down the photo and continued speaking, his voice steady but firm. "My son has asked me not to fire you," he said, making Wheeler look up in surprise. "He thinks this moment could mean something more. I'm trying to decide if he's right." Peterson sat quietly at his desk, watching history unfold in his small office. Outside, cameras continued to flash, and reporters speculated about what was happening inside. But in that room, something unexpected was taking place, a moment of recognition that went far deeper than just identifying the governor's son. Wheeler sank back into his chair, his world completely changed. He finally understood that his biggest mistake wasn't pushing the governor's son. It was pushing any child at all. The governor's press conference was scheduled for 2:00 p.m., but by 1:30, the steps of City Hall were already packed with reporters, community leaders, and curious citizens. The morning subway incident had touched a nerve in the city, bringing up conversations that many people had been avoiding for years. Inside his office, Governor Thompson sat with his family and his top advisors. Marcus had changed into a fresh set of clothes, but refused to cover up his scraped elbow. "People need to see what happened," he told his mother quietly. Diana squeezed his hand, amazed at her son's understanding of the moment. "The public wants blood," said Michael Reeves, the governor's chief of staff, looking at his tablet. "Social media is exploding. They're calling for Wheeler to be fired, arrested, even worse." He looked up at the governor. "Sir, the easy move here is to fire him and press charges. The public would love it." The governor loosened his tie and looked at his son. "Marcus, you've been quiet. Tell everyone what you told me at the station." Marcus stood up, suddenly nervous with all these important adults looking at him, but he remembered what his father always said about speaking from the heart. I think," he started slowly, "that firing Mr. Wheeler won't fix anything. It might make people feel good for a day, but then everything goes back to normal." The room was silent as Marcus continued. "What if?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What if we did something different? What if we showed people that change is possible?" Diana wiped a tear from her eye as Marcus spoke. The governor's press secretary, Jennifer Lee, was already typing notes on her laptop. "The boy might be onto something," she said. This could be more than just a response to one incident. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. Community leaders held signs saying "Justice for Marcus" and "Stop the Hate." But mixed in were other signs too, ones that read "Education, not punishment" and "Make this moment matter." Back in the office, the governor made his decision. "Here's what we're going to do," he announced, standing up. "Jennifer, get me statistics on similar incidents in our transit system. Michael, contact the police commissioner and the transit authority. We're going to need their cooperation." His team jumped into action, making calls and gathering data. Marcus watched with fascination as his father transformed a personal incident into something bigger. At 1:55 p.m., the governor's family walked toward the press conference room. Before entering, he knelt down to Marcus's eye level. "Are you sure you want to be up there with me?" he asked. "You don't have to do this." Marcus nodded firmly. "I'm sure, Dad. People need to see me stand next to you. They need to know I'm not afraid." The press conference room fell silent as the Thompson family entered. Cameras flashed and reporters leaned forward in their seats. The governor stepped up to the podium, with Marcus and Diana standing proudly beside him. "Good afternoon," the governor began. "By now, many of you have seen the video of what happened to my son this morning. As a father, my first instinct was anger. As your governor, my responsibility is justice. But today, my son Marcus has taught me that there's something more important than either of those things: change." The room buzzed with whispers as the governor continued. "Today, we are announcing the creation of the Public Service Reform Initiative. This comprehensive program will address bias and discrimination in all our public services, starting with our transit system." Marcus stood straighter as his father detailed the plan. There would be new training programs, community involvement requirements, and regular reviews of employee conduct. Wheeler wouldn't be fired. Instead, he would become part of the solution, working with community leaders to help identify and address prejudice in the workplace. "My son," the governor said, placing his hand on Marcus's shoulder, "showed wisdom beyond his years today. He taught me that real leadership isn't about punishment, it's about progress." Reporters' hands shot up with questions, but Marcus wasn't paying attention to them. He was watching the small TV screen in the corner of the room, which showed Wheeler watching the press conference in Peterson's office. The man was crying, his head in his hands, as he listened to the governor describe how a boy's forgiveness would lead to real change. Outside City Hall, the crowd had grown quiet, listening to the governor's words on their phones and portable radios. Something different was happening, something that felt like more than just another news story about anger and punishment. It felt like the beginning of real change. 3 days after the subway incident, James Wheeler sat nervously in a small conference room at City Hall. The room had one long table, a few chairs, and large windows that looked out over the city. His hands couldn't stop fidgeting with his tie, the same tie his daughter had helped him pick out that morning, telling him to make a good impression. The door opened, and Wheeler jumped to his feet. Governor Thompson entered first, followed by Marcus and Diana. A child psychologist named Dr. Sarah Reynolds came in last, carrying a notebook. Wheeler noticed that Marcus's scraped elbow was still visible under his short-sleeved shirt. "Please, sit down," the governor said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Everyone took their seats, with Marcus choosing to sit directly across from Wheeler. The boy's calm gaze made Wheeler want to look away, but he forced himself to stay focused. "Mr. Wheeler," Dr. Reynolds spoke first. "This meeting was Marcus's idea. He feels it's important for everyone to understand what happened that day and why it happened. Are you willing to have this conversation?" Wheeler nodded, his throat tight. "Yes," he managed to say. I want to understand too." Marcus looked at his parents, who nodded encouragingly. Then he began to speak, his voice clear and steady. "I want to tell you about other times this has happened to me," he said. "Not just the pushing, but the way people sometimes look at me or treat me differently. For the next 15 minutes, Marcus shared stories that made Wheeler's heart sink. The time a store clerk followed him around a shop, the woman who grabbed her purse when he sat next to her on a bus, the kids who weren't allowed to come to his birthday party because of where he lived. "But you know what's different about you, Mr. Wheeler?" Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. "You're the first person who might actually listen and learn from it." Wheeler felt tears forming in his eyes. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why do you think I can learn? I hurt you. I was horrible to you." Diana Thompson spoke for the first time. "Because you're here," she said simply. "Because when my son suggested this meeting, you agreed to come. Because you're willing to sit here and listen to a 12-year-old boy teach you about humanity." The governor watched silently as his son continued talking. Marcus explained how it felt to fall, not just physically but emotionally. How the hardest part wasn't the scrapes on his elbow, but knowing that a grown-up could hate him without even knowing him. "I don't hate anyone," Wheeler protested weakly. "I was just angry that day, about everything. My job, my life, my problems. And I became your target," Marcus finished for him, "because I looked like someone you thought it was okay to be angry at." The words hit Wheeler like a physical blow. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. When he looked up again, his eyes were red. "I've been doing this my whole life, haven't I? Finding people to blame for my problems." Dr. Reynolds nodded encouragingly. "Recognition is the first step, Mr. Wheeler. What matters now is what you do with that recognition." The governor finally spoke up. "That's why we're offering you a choice," he said. "You can resign from your job and walk away from all this, or you can join our new initiative as someone who's been through this process of change." Wheeler looked confused. "You want me to help? After what I did?" Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Sometimes the best teachers are people who learn the hardest lessons," he said, sounding older than his years. Diana reached over and squeezed her son's hand. The boy who had been pushed down was now helping to lift someone else up. "I'll do it," Wheeler said firmly, wiping his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Not just for Marcus, but for everyone I might have hurt before without even realizing it." As the meeting ended, Wheeler stood up shakily. Before leaving, he turned to Marcus one last time. "Thank you," he said softly, "for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Marcus nodded, understanding that something important had just happened in this small conference room. It wasn't just a conversation about one incident. It was the beginning of a real change, starting with one person who was finally ready to listen and learn. 1 month after the subway incident, James Wheeler stood in front of 30 transit workers, his hands steady now as he held a microphone. The training room was full, with people even standing along the walls. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, but everyone was listening. "My name is James Wheeler," he began, "and 1 month ago, I was the most hated man in New York." He paused as a few people nodded, recognizing him from the viral video. "I pushed down a 12-year-old boy because of what he looked like. But that boy, instead of wanting revenge, showed me a better way forward." At the back of the room, Marcus sat quietly with his mother. They attended every first session of each new training group, though Marcus never spoke. His presence alone was enough to make the story real for everyone. Wheeler had changed in the past month. He stood straighter, looked people in the eye, and spoke with purpose. The anger that had ruled his life for so long was being replaced by something else: understanding. Today, Wheeler continued, "We're going to talk about the thoughts we don't want to admit we have. The quick judgments we make, the anger we put on the wrong people." He clicked a button, and the infamous video played on the screen behind him. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. In her office across town, Sarah Chen, the woman who had recorded the original video, was looking at her phone. Her video now had over 10 million views, but it was her latest post that made her proud. Pictures of Wheeler's training sessions and the changes happening in the subway system. Back in the training room, Wheeler was sharing stories from his past. "I used to blame others for everything wrong in my life," he admitted. "That day at work? Must be those teenagers making noise. Problems with my boss? Must be those people who don't look like me getting special treatment." He walked to the center of the room. "But you know what I learned from Marcus Thompson? I learned that hate is heavy. It weighs you down. And when you let it go, when you really look at people as people, life gets lighter. The Transit Authority had made big changes in the past month. New signs about respect and dignity hung in every station. Security cameras have been upgraded. But most importantly, every employee was going through this new training program. Marcus watched as Wheeler showed slides of statistics, numbers about complaints, incidents, and problems in the transit system. Then he showed something else. Pictures of transit workers helping people, forming connections with the community, making a difference. This isn't just about avoiding another incident like mine, Wheeler explained. It's about building something better. Each person who comes through our stations is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. They all deserve respect. During the lunch break, Diana Thompson got a text from her husband. The governor's public service reform initiative was being copied by 3 other states. Wheeler's training program was becoming a model for change. In the afternoon session, Wheeler did something unexpected. He asked Marcus to stand up. The boy walked to the front of the room, and Wheeler stepped aside to let him speak. "Hi," Marcus said simply. "I'm the boy from the video, but that's not who I am anymore. Now I'm someone who believes people can change." He looked at Wheeler and smiled. And I was right. The room burst into applause. Some people had tears in their eyes. One older transit worker stood up and said what many were thinking. "We've needed this for a long time. We just didn't know how to start." By the end of the day, Wheeler had given out his email to several other transit stations that wanted to start the program. His daughter, who had been ashamed to go to school after the incident, was now proudly telling people about her father's work. As Marcus and his mother left the training center, they saw Wheeler standing by his car, looking at a new batch of emails on his phone. He looked up and waved. 1 month ago, he had pushed a boy down. Today, that same action was lifting people up in ways no one had expected. "Do you think it's really working?" Marcus asked his mother as they walked to their car. Diana looked back at Wheeler, who was now excitedly talking to 2 other transit workers about expanding the program. "Yes," she said softly. "Sometimes the worst moments bring out the best changes. You taught us all that." The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, but for once, those shadows weren't hiding any anger or fear. They were just shadows, and the light was getting brighter every day. 1 year after the subway incident, Central Station looked very different. New signs with positive messages hung on freshly painted walls, and security cameras had been upgraded throughout the building. But the biggest change wasn't in the building, it was in the people. Marcus Thompson, now 13, stood on a small stage that had been set up near the spot where he had fallen a year ago. Behind him was a large banner that read The Marcus Project, 1 year of change. More than 200 people filled the station's main hall, including reporters, city officials, and transit workers from all over the state. A year ago, Marcus began, his voice stronger and more confident than ever. "Something bad happened right here. But today, we're not here to remember the fall. We're here to celebrate how we all got back up." In the front row, James Wheeler sat with his family. His daughter, Emily, held his hand tightly. She wasn't embarrassed anymore. Instead, she was proud. Her father had become someone who helped change lives. Governor Thompson watched from the side of the stage as his son continued speaking. "The Marcus Project has now trained over 5,000 transit workers," Marcus announced. "But it's not just about training. It's about understanding each other. It's about seeing people, really seeing them." The crowd applauded as Marcus showed slides on a large screen. The numbers told an amazing story. Complaints about discrimination had dropped by 60%. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high. 7 other states had adopted similar programs. Sarah Chen, who had recorded the original video, stood near the back with her phone. But this time, she wasn't recording trouble. She was documenting success. Her social media followers had watched the whole journey, from that first angry video to today's celebration. "And now," Marcus said, smiling, "I'd like to invite Mr. Wheeler to come up here." Wheeler walked to the stage, no longer the angry man he had been a year ago. He hugged Marcus before taking the microphone. Some people in the crowd wiped tears from their eyes, remembering the viral video and comparing it to this moment. "A year ago, I was lost in anger," Wheeler said. "I had spent years blaming others for my problems. But this brave young man showed me a different path." He turned to Marcus. "You could have demanded my job, my punishment. Instead, you demanded my understanding. and that changed everything. Diana Thompson, watching from beside her husband, remembered how worried she had been about letting Marcus continue riding the subway after the incident. But Marcus had insisted, saying, "If I stop, nothing changes." Now, she watched her son stand tall on stage, knowing he had been right. Wheeler presented Marcus with a special award from the Transit Workers Union, the first ever Champion of Change medal. But Marcus had a surprise too. He pulled out a Transit Workers badge with Wheeler's name on it, newly engraved with the title Chief of Community Relations. "Mr. Wheeler isn't just teaching about change anymore," Marcus announced. "Starting today, he's in charge of making sure every station in our city becomes a place where everyone feels welcome." The crowd erupted in applause. Margaret Wilson, the elderly woman who had helped Marcus up a year ago, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She still rode the subway every day, but now she saw more smiles, more helpful workers, more community. After the ceremony, people gathered for refreshments in the station's new community room. Wheeler's training videos played on screens around the room, showing how one moment of anger had turned into a movement of understanding. Marcus stood with his parents, watching Wheeler talk excitedly about his plans for expanding the program. "Dad," he said quietly, "remember when I said I wanted this to mean something more?" The governor nodded, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. "I think it worked," Marcus said, smiling as he watched people from all different backgrounds talking and laughing together in the station. Outside, the afternoon sun shone through the station's windows, but there were no shadows of fear or anger anymore. Instead, there was light. The kind of light that comes when people learn to see each other as human beings first. A new sign hung over the station's entrance. "Welcome to Central Station, where every person matters." Below it, in smaller letters, was a quote from Marcus. "Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes." The subway station where a boy once fell had become a place where everyone could stand tall together.